Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Andrew, and we are the IB English guys. And today, we want to present to you a fantastic paper one. We know a lot of you are working hard to improve your skills, and we have a good one for you.
That's right. The first thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about the text and review the text that the student responded to. This was in a previous video that we looked and annotated. Then we're going to talk about the rubric briefly and talk about the key terms. After that, we're going to look at the student's rudimentary outline and how that student organized their thinking and look at the student's response. And finally, we're just going to briefly talk about why we really like this paper.
Yeah, again, we think this is something that'll really help you out a lot, and it is an excellent paper. But I think before we look at that, we need to review the text for those of you who did not see the last video. Too bad for you, that's tragic, but we will review it for you.
Yeah, definitely watch the video because it's so important. This text is called Journey of a Lifetime. This is part of a much bigger text. It's a cover story, it's an informational text. It's an article from New Scientist. And this talks about the elements of all human beings and all living things that the whole earth is made of.
I think it talks about water. Do you have your glass of water this time?
Yeah, I don't have my glass of water handy.
Yeah, it follows the journey of a water molecule, and it really reads like a science fiction novel. You know, I think it covers a span of about 4.5 billion years in this one short page. And it just incredible references to time and space. It's a very entertaining read.
Yeah, there's humor. There's a reference to the dinosaur and the dinosaur urine, and it's again showing that journey of water as it goes through, and it ends with the actual page that the text is written on. And the purpose of the text is to entertain and activate our imagination, but also inform us of how water is the essential element of all things and all living things.
Yeah, and I know you're eager to see the paper, but I think before we look at the paper, we just want to highlight the criteria quickly and talk about a couple of aspects that we think are critical that you should be doing as a student, and you'll see our student execute these moves.
That's right. The criteria A is understanding and interpretation, and what we want to think about is that our interpretation is convincing and insightful, and we're thinking about implications and subtleties.
Yeah, and of course you always want to have well-chosen textual references that's taking language from the text itself and embedding those into your own sentences. Let's talk about criterion B, Mr. Jaws, which is analysis and evaluation.
Yeah, when we're thinking about analysis, we're taking the text apart and we're really making our analysis insightful and convincing, and we're thinking about authorial choices.
Yeah, and you're looking at those authorial choices, explaining them, and you're also evaluating them, which means you're making a judgment. Are they effective in accomplishing the mission and purpose of the piece? So we got to do some evaluation as well.
Criteria C is that focus and organization, and we want to think about focus. And when we think about focus, we're going to focus on the guiding question and use the wording of the guiding question, but also focus on a thesis and an argument that we're trying to make.
Of course, keep your paper well organized, multiple paragraphs, and again, have those keywords, those guiding question keywords in the topic sentences and some of the concluding sentences as well to maintain that focus and show that you're an organized student.
That's right, Mr. Cohen. And again, criteria D is language, and we want to make sure that our language is clear, it's accurate, we're thinking about grammatical accuracy, strong vocabulary, good academic register.
Yeah, and don't forget to use a good range of sentence structures as well. You need some short sentences, some long sentences, really show off your best academic language, okay?
Yeah. So the guiding question that the student responded to reads as follows: how does the author use language to inform the reader and activate their imagination?
Yeah, again, in the last video, we talked about these two key aspects: inform versus activate the imagination. We used yellow to annotate the informational part, and we used the green to sort of show that literary part that reinforces the imaginative aspect of the text.
Yeah, we talked about the thesis already, and we've looked at that. Again, you can see the thesis here. I love the idea of the fantastic journey, transcending time and space, using the wording of the guiding question. Now let's look at the rudimentary outline that the student constructed.
The paper we're going to look at today, the student chose to write 6 paragraphs. Of course, they started with an introduction that introduced the text, talked a little bit about the target audience, and then it will conclude with the thesis. What's their first body paragraph going to be about, Mr. Giles?
This is about the way the article captures the attention of the reader and invites the reader into the magical world of science. So it's going to look at that introduction that we talked about in our last video.
The next body paragraph, there is a large image on the text. Of course, if the IB provides a large image, especially a color image like this one, you need to talk about that. So that it looks like the student will dedicate an entire paragraph to talking about visual elements and connect that to the idea of nostalgia.
Yeah, and the third body paragraph is going to talk about the rich figurative language, that personification and imagery that's there to capture our imagination. Really smart.
The next body paragraph will be about the motif of time that goes throughout the piece. And this is really important because it shows the history of the water cycle going back to 4.5 billion years to today. So that's a really important paragraph as well. And of course, Mr. Giles will end with a conclusion. And that's where the student will try to talk about the so what and really show that they've understood deeply and end in some impactful way.
That's great. So now let's move in. Let's look at the student piece of writing. Just note that we've typed out this piece. The student wrote this in the exact amount of time for a paper one.
Did you type this one or did I type this one?
I think
this is you.
I think I did type this one.
Thanks.
And again, it's just useful for us to look at as a good sample.
Sorry, students, don't forget the entire paper. It can be found in the links below. So you have this complete copy for your studies.
Yeah. So I noticed, first of all, in the introduction, I love the opening sentence to talk about the unimaginable and the intangible aspect of science. And again, the idea of traveling to another planet, I think that's really a really imaginative, good way to start.
Yeah, and I really love how they say that this information is informative and accessible, but it's also fascinating. I think they're already building in that sort of literary and scientific aspect into the piece.
Right.
It's really cool.
It is really good. And again, there's again a clear understanding of where it was published, who it's written for, and again, some speculation about the audience. Again, this is something that is a critical part of the older course, but we believe that mentioning audience in an introduction is always kind of useful to think about. Where is this published and who's it written for?
Of course, like any good paper one, the introductory paragraph ends with a very clear and perceptive thesis. We've talked about that before, but this paper is off and running, Mr.
Yeah,
Giles.
this is a great handshake. Okay, the first body...
Sorry, you said it's a great handshake. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, the introduction is your handshake with your reader. You want to really have a firm handshake and really have a clear direction, and I think that it's there. Okay, first body paragraph, I think, is again talking about the headline and the caption and this sort of introductory part of the text, but it's also mentioning the magical world of science.
Well, that's the idea that they're focusing on. The student is saying, hey, this author has presented a magical world of science, and that's what I want to focus on first. They're very clever to start with the title. We always want to think about titles and the impact and what they're trying to do for the reader. They talk about the font being bolded, and we see that great use of orange, indicating that they're talking about the writer-reader relationship. What else do you see, Mr. Giles?
I see some great, well-chosen references. The idea of forge, incandescent, and germs. Again, these sort of lexical clusters that are mentioned. Again, I think it's really good in the text and pulling references from the text. And again, so many good references to author-reader, like you just mentioned.
Just quickly, we know there's some new viewers with us each video. I just want to quickly go over the highlighting protocol, if I may, Mr. Giles. We have yellow; those represent the literary features. We have orange representing the author-audience relationship. We have blue representing the textual references, and we have green that really shows that focus in the language of the question. Just something to keep your eye on as we go through.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because I think there's a good blend of those things. Again, the next body paragraph, the student makes a good choice, I think, to focus on the visual elements of this particular magazine article. And this is something that, again, we see in the text, and we see that reference to imagination and the visual elements. So a clear, good topic sentence is established.
Students and teachers, the IB has invested a lot of money to print these exams in color. When you have a good color graphic, you need to talk about it. So this student has, as Mr. Giles said, made a great choice and done that very effectively.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next paragraph, we talk about how language is fascinating the reader. Again, the idea is the fascination with the reader, and they set up some features to do that. What do you notice, Giles?
Well, I noticed that in the middle of the paragraph, they talk about this idea of our molecule and that inclusive language. But I love the next part where it says that the water molecule is like a friend that we know and love. I think that shows good insight, that shows some voice, and that would get a tick mark for me.
Something that gets a tick mark for me is I just love they focused on verbs. They focused on the words nudged, helped, and found. I think many students are always striving, Mr. Giles, to find these really elaborate, fancy terms. Sometimes just talking about good old-fashioned nouns, verbs, and adjectives goes a long way in a paper one.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it's got all that figurative personification that's there. The next paragraph is one that I think is strong because it focuses on structure. Like you said, it's talking about that sort of journey, that time and space, but it's looking at the chronological structure. Starts 4 billion years ago and ends with right now. Again, that's really important to talk about.
Yeah, I noticed another reference here to tone. I believe the student has talked about tone several times in this piece, and I think tone and mood is something we always want to focus on. Teachers, I know this is something you emphasize in your class. Students, don't forget to include this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just lots of rich references to the sort of stylistic features as well as references. And finally, we have a short conclusion. Essential to get to the conclusion. We want to make sure we do that. Again, notice the words in green that are there, referencing science and myth and fantasy. Those things are really important that are there. And then finally, we have that final sentence that I think is really even worth quoting, where she talks about how here we are floating through the air, swirling through our bodies, and sitting on the paper in front of our eyes.
Mr. Giles, that sounds like the language of the author himself, doesn't it?
I love that. It's, again, using those rich verbs and again, ending with a little bit of a flourish.
Now, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and as a writer, I think you're leaving with that sort of sense of personality, and that's really smart.
Yeah, in the end, Mr. Giles, when I look at this paper from afar, I can really see how well highlighted and how well lit up this paper is. Definitely Giles Cohen students. And these papers score very, very well. You notice the seamless blend of literary features, textual references, the green indicating focus, the strong language. This, again, is some shade of 7 in my opinion.
I agree. Of course, there are things in the text the student didn't choose to write about, and there are details that are not mentioned, but what is mentioned is very strong, and I think there's really good convincing interpretation.
Yeah, in closing, students, we believe that if you go through these videos, go through the videos where we talk about the reading process, go through these videos where we talk about the writing process, look at student work, listen to us, we are experienced examiners, listen to our explanations, try to gain these insights. We really believe that if you can incorporate these skills and ideas into your writing, you too can be successful in your IB endeavors. Thank you for joining us today. We hope this video has provided some value. If not, let us know in the comments. Tell us what will provide some value. We will make the video for you. Thanks for joining and take care. Bye.
Thanks, guys.